Getting you ready for the NFL Draft is your host, Andrew DiCecco, on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Great to be with you on this Thursday evening. This is the Birds NFL Draft Special brought to you by Rita's. With me, Andrew DiCecco, and I thank you for hanging out with me. Got you till 8 o'clock tonight. Last week was a 3-hour show. But this is going to be, obviously, Eagles draft-centric. And to kind of update everybody, the Eagles still have 8 picks. The first round will be pick 32. The second round, 64. Third round, 96th overall. Fourth round, 134. The fifth round, 161 via the Houston Texans. Fifth round, 164 via the Cleveland Browns. Fifth round, 165 via the Washington Commanders. And fifth round, 168. Well, that's their own. So there's a lot of different ways that they could go, and the Eagles actually find themselves in a prime spot at 32. That's assuming they stay at 32. We'll get into that later in the program, but they obviously have a ton of needs, but they've done a really good job of draft-proofing the roster. Now, a lot of the players that they've signed are one-year prove-it deals, so the jury's out as to how much they can help the Eagles, but I think for the roles that they're going to be expected to play, I think that could be a viable solution, but also temper your expectations because a lot of those players have question marks. But the Eagles do have needs at certain positions, like linebacker, like safety, like defensive tackle, like edge rusher. To kind of go through, this has been an offseason of maintenance, and it really shouldn't be a surprise if you've paid attention to anything Howie Roseman has said. Really, at every chance that he's had to speak, he sort of alluded to the fact that be patient. This offseason is going to look a little bit different than it has in past years, and some of the things we're going to do goes against conventional wisdom, but don't ever expect Howie Roseman to go in the offseason trying to just be fine. He's going to leave no stone unturned and make sure the roster is as strong as it can be going into the season, but they do have quite a few different holes, and of course they've lost certain mainstays like Brandon Graham to retirement, and I saw something today that Brandon Graham has said he's 90% retired. You're never going to keep BG quite out of it yet. He loves the game, obviously, but they did lose Slay at corner. He was a mainstay and a really underrated player for the Eagles. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, of course, was shipped out to the Houston Texans. That leaves a sizable void there at safety opposite Reed Blankenship. Milton Williams. We're going to talk a little bit about defensive tackle today. Milton Williams is with the New England Patriots now, signed a lucrative free agent deal. Josh Sweat heads to the Cardinals. Edge rusher, cornerback Isaiah Rodgers goes to the Vikings, and Oren Burks goes to the Bengals. So they've obviously lost quite a bit of talent from their Super Bowl roster, and they have signed a plethora of one-year prove-it players, such as Joshua Uche, who I have some questions about, but he did have 11.5 sacks in 2022, but you have to go back to 2022. Running back A.J. Dillon, Tyrone Johnson and I talked a little bit about him on the Best Show Ever when we were assessing the running back group and how it could fit. And I do believe that the Eagles should explore drafting a running back really on day 3. I don't think that it would be in the cards to do it on day 2. But some of the players that they've signed, we talked about tight end position being a sore spot. Well, they signed Harrison Bryant, who was drafted in the 4th round out of FAU back in 2020. And they also signed Kylan Granson. He was a draft pick of the Colts back in 2021. Very limited production, 86 catches. Both players have less than 1,000 yards for their career, and they're mostly vying for a 3rd spot on the depth chart behind, right now, Dallas Goedert, Grant Calcaterra. My guy, E.J. Jenkins, is also in the mix there as well, but I would expect the Eagles to do a little bit of something at that position. They also signed cornerback Adoree Jackson, who is expected to compete with Kelee Ringo, third-year cornerback who is the front-runner right now to be the starter opposite Quinyon Mitchell. We're going to talk a little bit about cornerback as well. Long snapper Charlie Hewlett, who was released by Cleveland, signed with the Eagles to replace Rick Lovato. Return specialist Avery Williams. Now, this is an interesting one because he was drafted in 2021 with the Falcons. He has a running back background dating back to high school. And Nick Sirianni seemed particularly interested when he brought his name up at the owners' meetings last week, talking about how he's excited to get him into the fold and the different ways they can use him. If you read between the lines, obviously that would suggest that They plan to use him sporadically on offense, or at least in a way that goes against conventional wisdom. He was also a cornerback at Boise State, because I remember watching him there, and despite being 5'9", 185 pounds, I did like the fluidity. I thought he was a pretty polished athlete and had some good speed and alluring traits, in addition to being an electric return specialist, which he also can return kicks and punts. Patrick Johnson, the Eagles' 7th-round pick in 2021, re-signs. He made the team each of the last 4 seasons, but then he was waived, and the Giants picked him up off waivers. He returns to Philadelphia because, as I understand it, he wanted to make it work. He really liked playing in Philadelphia, and so both parties found a way to make it happen. Offensive tackle Kendall Lamb joins the Eagles. He's a veteran. He comes over from the Miami Dolphins. And Matt Pryor, who comes over from Chicago. He was an Eagles draft pick a number of years ago. And Azeez Ojulari, the edge rusher, comes over from the New York Giants, 24 years old. I believe that was the most enticing of the signings. I think he does have a future, and there's a world in which he may start opposite Nolan Smith, though everyone who's listened to me or read my work knows that I'm pretty bullish on Jalix Hunt and his upside. They've also signed, obviously, running back Saquon Barkley and Lane Johnson to extensions. And today, just a little bit ago, about 20 minutes ago, they signed wide receiver Terrace Marshall, who has bounced around to 3 different teams. He was drafted by the Carolina Panthers in the 2nd round. He has just 60-plus catches in his career, 800 yards and 1 touchdown. So minimal production there, and maybe if you're the Eagles, you kind of roll the dice and you try to you bank on upside, but I think more realistically, he's going to be in camp looking to compete with the likes of Johnny Wilson, Aniyah Smith, Danny Gray, and some of those other players that they have that were signed to futures deals. But we'll have to see. If he can really make an impact on special teams, perhaps he can stick. But the point is that 90 players go to training camp, and you have to fill out the roster, and he at least gives you experience and some pedigree. Went to LSU, and he's played in 43 career games, so we'll have to wait and see what he's able to do. The Eagles also, today, held their local pro day at the NovaCare Complex, and there's a number of different players that I think are going to be enticing, and I'm going to tell you about them coming up next. You listen to the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special right here on 97.5 The Fanatic.
ESPN's Adam Schefter. Draft is right here. Now, more of the Birds Insider Draft Special with Andrew DiCecco, sponsored by Rita's on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
97.5 The Fanatic, 6:11 here. This Birds Insider NFL Draft Special, Andrew DiCecco here. I have you until 8 o'clock tonight. Setting the table here and really previewing some of the needs. And we're going to go into 3 different positions today: defensive tackle, safety, and tight end. And I'm going to reveal my big boards where I go through 5 players. I rank the 5 players at that position, at least to my estimation. And then I also mention some other players that if they don't take any player of the big 5, where they could be available. But I did allude to the Eagles having their local pro day today, and that's where you can have local prospects, whether it be universities or players who have local ties. So there's a running back who went to Old Dominion, for example, and he was a Coatesville native, and he went to Rutgers, and he participated in Rutgers Pro Day, and they had a running back from Kansas who's a local player, and he was at the pro day today as well. But there are a number of Rutgers players that were there today, and I'm going to kind of highlight a few that are notable. Running back Kyle Manungai. Kyle Manungai is probably the best running back that Rutgers has had coming out of the draft since Ray Rice. Really effective player, decent in pass protection, can catch the football a little bit. I like his contact balance and ability to play through contact. And watching him go through his drills at pro day, he can run routes. He can catch the ball cleanly. I think he's a very polished product. And he kind of reminds me, and I was telling Tyrone this a little bit ago, that he reminds you a little bit of Doug Martin, the muscle hamster, if you remember him. I think that he's going to be a really good 5th-round pick. And where the Eagles currently have 4 of them, I think he would make some sense there because I think aside from Saquon Barkley and Will Shipley, who is a 2024 4th-round pick, I think he's a lock. There's some questions there because they obviously have A.J. Dillon, the veteran running back who was formerly with the Green Bay Packers, but he's coming off a season in which he didn't play at all as he was nursing a neck injury. So I have some questions as to whether or not he would be a viable fit there at as the 3rd running back. And really, his style of play is kind of redundant. Usually when you're bringing in a player to spell someone like a Saquon Barkley, you want a player with a different type of skill set, which is where I think Will Shipley would thrive, and really in this case, Kyle Manungai as well. Linebacker Tyreen Pell was also present there for the Eagles' local day. Long snapper Austin Riggs. That's an interesting one because I mentioned the Eagles signing Charlie Hewlett, who was a 34-year-old player who's been around. He's with the Cleveland Browns for a number of years. So you would think that his status is going to be relatively cemented, but who knows? He brings someone like an Austin Riggs as an undrafted free agent into training camp, and all of a sudden maybe you're challenging him a little bit. They also have Shaquan Loyal, who I thought had a really good pro day, and the player that I like probably the second most behind Kyle Manungai, who is a player of interest. You might want to bookmark this name, Robert Longerbeam. He's a defensive back, about 5'11", 175. He was an outside corner for the Scarlet Knights, but he's going to be probably a nickel player because he lacks the desired play strength. He has a slight build. He's competitive, but bigger receivers will have their way with him, but he is immensely athletic. Runs a 4.3, jumped out of the building at the combine. He didn't do any of the drills except for the short shuttle and the 3-cone at Pro Day because he already tested off the charts. And my understanding is at the Eagles local day, he didn't test at all. He was just there. He was just present, but no testing. So that's another player that I think would make a little bit of sense. But as we sort of were going through it, I wanted to highlight some of the positions where I believe the Eagles are leanest and kind of go through what that room looks like currently. Defensive tackle, we'll lead there because that's been a organizational philosophy of fortifying the trenches, and I don't think the Eagles have enough there, even with Jalen Carter heading that unit. Jordan Davis is there as well, and Moro Ojomo. Both players played 37% of the snaps last season, and they need to fill the void left with Milton Williams, who obviously is with the Patriots. He played 48% of the defensive snaps last year. So they don't have anybody that for sure can do it, and they certainly could stand to add a little bit of depth there to kind of work in and have some sort of a rotation. Thomas Booker returns for training camp, and they also have a pair of players that maybe a lot of folks aren't familiar with, and Byron Young and Gabe Hall. Byron Young, of course, was acquired via waivers before the season, didn't play a snap for the Eagles last year, and Gabe Hall was on the practice squad all last season. He went to BYU. He can play any position on the defensive line. He weighs about 295, and he mentioned about going against Landon Dickerson and how much those matchups really helped him. And he said, yeah, Landon got the better of it every single time, but I got better from it. So he's a player that I sort of have highlighted as a second-year player that's kind of under the radar that I'm looking to keep an eye on. But still, I think as you're starting to see the names here, you see how lean they are in that area. Safety. Reed Blankenship, who I think is best suited to be a number 2. Sidney Brown, the third-round pick from a couple of years ago. The Eagles are going to give him every opportunity to be a starter, but I'm not 100% sure that he has the discipline and can play within the structure of Vic Fangio's defense. That's a requirement for any defensive back, really any player in Vic Fangio's system. You can't be a high-variance type of player. You can't be volatile. You have to be able to take proper angles. You have to be assignment sound. Can Sidney Brown do that? Well, we're going to find out. Tristan McCullum's also there. Lewis Seen. Lewis Seen's a player who was drafted in the first round a few years ago out of Georgia, pick number 32. Suffered an injury 4 games into his career. The Vikings parted ways with him last summer. He was on the Bills practice squad, and he was elevated for a handful of games. The Eagles signed him to a reserve future deal before the season ran out, and he's a pretty interesting prospect, but far from a slam dunk in making the roster. And Andre Sam, who was an undrafted safety last year, rounds out the room. Linebacker. The Eagles are pretty lean here. They have Zach Baun, who obviously headlines that room. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. returning for his second season. The Eagles are very happy with what he's been able to do behind the scenes, and I think he's going to be primed for a far more prominent role. The question I have with him isn't about ability. It's about building up his play strength and his physique to make sure he's able to withstand the rigors that come with a full slate of games. And Kobe Dean, of course, is recovering from the torn patellar tendon, and we'll have to wait and see what the timeline holds for him. And Dallas Gant was on the practice squad last year, and he sort of rounds out that room. I'm going to tell you about one more position coming up, the edge rusher room, and where they stand, and we're going to start to dive in to the big board right here on the Birds Insiders NFL Draft Special right here on 97.5 The Fanatic.
Fanatic Sports Update.
I'm Austin Jones, and this is your Fanatic Sports Update. The Eagles have signed Terrace Marshall Jr. Marshall Jr., former LSU Tiger, has spent his career playing with the Carolina Panthers, the Las Vegas Raiders, as well as the San Francisco 49ers. The Philadelphia Phillies look to finish up their series with the Atlanta Braves as they take on the Braves in Atlanta. Jesus Luzardo is on the mound. First pitch is for 7:15. You can watch the game on NBC Sports Philadelphia. Last night, the Sixers won, and they did not hurt their lottery chances. They have 2 more games left in their season. Tomorrow night, they play the Atlanta Hawks. Tip-off is for 7 p.m. You can listen to that game on 97.5 The Fanatic. Also, the Flyers defeated the New York Rangers last night. They will be back as well on Saturday to face the New York Islanders. That game will be for 12:30. You can listen to that game on 97.5 The Fanatic. I'm Austin Jones on the home of the 76ers and Flyers, 97.5 The Fanatic, 97.5thefanatic.com.
Give us a call or text us at 610-632-0975 for answers and comments on the Super Bowl champs. Here again is your host, Birds Insider Andrew DiCecco, sponsored by Reedus on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
97.5 The Fanatic, 624 here. Andrew DiCecco with this Birds Insider NFL Draft Special. I have you until 8 o'clock tonight, after which my man Ray Dunn takes you from 8 to 10. Talking a lot of Eagles and really setting the table here for where their needs are most prevalent. And we're going to go through the big boards that I have at defensive tackle, safety, and linebacker. But before we get to edge rusher, I want to tell you to try Rita's new Skittles Ice and Skittles Pop topping. I definitely have. Here for a limited time. That you got to check it out because we had it delivered here last week. Silvana, Tyrone, and I, and everyone who was working that day, it didn't last long. We threw the topping on there, and it was tremendous. I can't say enough good things about it. I had some Rita's last night. That was the grape nerds flavor, and I definitely held off on the candy there. But bottom line is, go check out Rita's because they're doing some tremendous things right now. But looking at edge rusher as we round things off here and sort of look at the room as it stands right now, obviously there's Nolan Smith and there's J-Wix Hunt. Both players, I feel very strongly, are going to take a big leap forward this year. Beyond that, however, there are questions. Azeez Ojulari, I think that was the best Eagles offseason addition. 22 career sacks. If he's able to stay healthy, I think they're going to have something there. The talent is evident, and I believe that Jeremiah Washburn, the Eagles' outside linebackers and edge rushers coach, is going to get the most out of it, just like he did with J-Wix Hunt and Nolan Smith last season, and Josh Sweat, really. Josh Uche is a little bit of a question mark, 11.5 sacks back in 2022. He's been radio silent relatively the last couple of seasons. Perhaps he wasn't a scheme fit for the Chiefs, and maybe that's what led to the regression, I guess you could say. But if he's your fourth edge rusher, okay, I could buy that. But he has to be able to play. He doesn't have the length that you like, and he is deficient in run support. So he is a player that you want to limit his snaps. And then there's Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff is still around for the time being. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But as of this moment, he's on the roster. Maybe, look, I understand there might be some collective eye rolls out there, but perhaps Bryce Huff needs a full offseason to digest the Fangio system. This is a departure from what he was asked to do with the Jets, and the Eagles believe that the story is yet to be written on Bryce Huff, so he's going to be presumably given every opportunity to carve out a role there in the rotation. And then really rounding things out is Patrick Johnson, who's a special teamer, a really good special teamer, by the way, and had a really good summer in training camp last year. It's very rare that you see a seventh-round pick stick from a number of different seasons. So he's back for another opportunity to make the roster. And then O'Shawn Mathis and KJ Henry were two signings that were on the practice squad. They were reserve future signings. O'Shawn Mathis played, I believe, in a game last season, mostly on special teams. So you can see that there's a need there. Obviously, it's very top-heavy with Nolan Smith, J-Wix Hunt, and Azeez Ojulari at that position. But we're going to now start by going through my big board as it stands at defensive tackle, and I'm going to count down. I'm going to count down from 5 to 1 here. We're going to go at 5. Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, 6'3", 329 pounds. He was a 2-year starter, and for those wondering where he plays, he's a 3-technique player. I like that he has a really dense frame. He plays with heavy and violent hands. His weight does fluctuate, though, so he's 329. He's listed at that. But he's been as heavy as 360, so that's something to be mindful of. But he doesn't generate a ton of pressure, just 11.5 sacks during his Buckeyes career. But that's a player that I think, if you get him in the right system, he can be a force. Though I view him more on the cusp of the first, early second round. But I do like his upside, quite a bit. I like the violence in which he plays, and he's always in on run defense. But that's a player there that you could bookmark at number 5, for me at least. Number 4, this is a player that I've mocked to the Eagles quite a bit in the 2 mock drafts that I've done for Inside the Birds. Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolan. 6'4", 300 pounds. I like that he has some athleticism to him. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Milton Williams in the way that he's able to move. I don't think he's one-dimensional at all. He offers some ability to push the pocket and provide pressure on quarterbacks. 3 technique for the Rebels. He's explosive off the ball. That's the one thing that really stands. He's light on his feet, and I like that he's able to use his length to his advantage. He plays with ferocity, with urgency. And for me, when you look at all of the players that are there that could be realistic at 32, that's a player that I could see the Eagles waiting and standing pat at 32 and drafting. Now, I understand that there was a question in the YouTube chat about which player the Eagles would be most inclined to trade up for in the draft if the board falls a certain way, which I appreciate the question, and my answer to that would be perhaps the next player that I'm going to mention, Derek Harmon, but I'll give you another one because we're going to save the edge rusher big board for next week's show, which is going to be, or it's already setting up to be a fun one. But I'm going to say Boston College edge rusher Donovan Ezeraku. Now, aside from being a Williamstown, New Jersey native, he has tremendous length. He's 6'2", 250, long arms, 16.5 sacks last year, 20.5 tackles for loss. You often hear the term risers and fallers during the pre-draft cycle, when in reality, these players were always highly thought of in NFL circles. It's just on the outside, a lot of folks are catching up to those players. But there's a world in which the Eagles may have to trade up a handful of spots to make sure that they get him. Nothing drastic, but that's a player. You look at how much they value edge rusher. I just went through the names. You see that they're a little light there behind Azeez Ojulari, so they really only have, in my estimation, 3 that they can count on. There's question marks about Josh Uche and Bryce Huff. So Donovan Ezeraku and Derek Harmon, who I'm going to talk about in a moment, would be the players that would be worth trading up for. Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia, is a player that would be a tremendous upgrade to what they have. Really good ball skills and everything else. He's may or may not be on my list here, covered up, but I don't view the Eagles as a team that's going to be willing to trade up for a safety in the first round, especially where they're sitting in a sweet spot at 64 in the second round, where there should be a handful of appealing options that I think would be a really good fit in Vic Fangio's defense. But the player that I alluded to that would be another trade-up candidate is a defensive tackle, and that's Derek Harmon from Oregon. 6'5", 313 pounds. So you like the size and the length there, and that would pair very nicely opposite Jalen Carter, of course. But he spent his first 3 seasons at Michigan State before transferring to Oregon. 8.5 sacks for his career, so obviously didn't get home with regularity. I do think that he has developmental upside as a pass rusher. He moves pretty well. He's coming off his best season, by the way, with 5 sacks and 10.5 tackles for loss. Good motor. He never seems to give up on a play. He always seems to be in on a play. He pursues ball carriers with urgency, which I really appreciate, and it really stands out when you watch his tape. And I like that he can hold his own against the run. But I think that when you look at this is why it's tough. I was split between Walter Nolan and Derek Harmon. I was going back and forth with 3 and 4. He does need to develop a little bit more as a pass rusher, but I do believe that he's probably a more well-rounded player than Walter Nolan, but it is very slim. Different teams are going to have those players slotted, differently. I think you could see Walter Nolan be 3 and Derek Harmon be 4, but I think for me and the work that I've done on these prospects, I currently have Derek Harmon as the third-ranked defensive tackle. But to pause for a moment, I do want to remind everybody this hour is brought to you by Family and Company Jewelers. Visit them on Route 70 in Marlton, New Jersey, or at FamilyJewelers.com. South Jersey's diamond destination. Moving forward here, at number 2 on my defensive tackle big board, that's Kenneth Grant. 6'4", 330 pounds, out of the University of Michigan. For those who pay attention to the different mock drafts, and I know there seems to be new ones out every single day, Todd McShay from ESPN actually had Kenneth Grant going to the Eagles at 32. Though he did consider a certain tight end that I'm going to mention. But a little background on Kenneth Grant. He's more of a true nose tackle, so it's kind of hard for me to see the fit, given that you already have a Jordan Davis. There might be a little bit of a redundancy there. But I do like that he is so strong at the point of attack. He's immovable. At 330 pounds, one would think that he would be. But powerful player. He thrives most defending the run, so it doesn't necessarily have those enticing pass rush qualities yet. But he does have a lot of power at that position, strength at the point of attack. Not quite Vince Wilfork like, but he can besides playing nose, he also has the ability to play 3 technique, which definitely affected my ratings a little bit because he's not purely a nose tackle, and he is athletic for that size. I know it sounds familiar probably to a lot of Eagles fans because you're probably, it's conjuring shades of Jordan Davis discussion and discourse back to the 2022 draft. But, yeah, Kenneth Grant is immensely talented, and I think he's just scratching the surface of what he's able to do, and to be able to be that size and have that athleticism and still have developmental upside, yeah, that's pretty appealing. I see where Todd was coming from by mocking him to the Eagles. I just personally don't see him as a fit. 6.5 sacks for his career, so obviously that leaves, something to be desired there. But, I mean, just to recap, at 5, I had Tyleik Williams from Ohio State. At 4, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. At 3, Derek Harmon from Oregon. At 2, Kenneth Grant from Michigan. I'm going to tell you about my top-rated defensive tackle in a few moments. You're listening to the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special right here on 97.5 The Fanatic.
Mike Missanelli, Bill Colarulo, and Ray Dunn. They have a lot to say about Philadelphia sports. The big stories you want to hear about. The Mike Missanelli Show, weekdays 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Philadelphia. more of the Birds Insider Draft Special with Andrew DiCecco, sponsored by Weekdays on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
97.5 The Fanatic. Andrew DiCecco here. Have you until 8 o'clock. Listen to the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special. We also have it live on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe. We have a lot of folks that are doing some really good things behind the scenes and making that channel the best that it can be, including our own Dylan McKinnon, who's doing a tremendous job and does a tremendous job for us every single day here at the station. And I was going through my defensive tackle big board, and to kind of recap, Tyleik Williams coming in at 5 from Ohio State. At 4, I have Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. At 3, we have Derek Harmon from Oregon. At 2, that would be Kenneth Grant from Michigan. And at number 1, a player the Eagles have no shot at getting, but you have to mention him. That's Mason Graham from Michigan. 6'4", 306. He's the total package at that position. Leverage, strength, explosion, heavy active hands, a sturdy base. And what I really like about him when it stands out is that he moves well in confined spaces. So sometimes you liken that to the dancing bear. That's a term that you sometimes hear. But you don't often see defensive tackles be able to move like he can. Jalen Carter is one of the rare examples. But Mason Graham, the Eagles, barring something unforeseen, have no shot at getting him. But there you have it. That's my top 5. And then there are a couple that got honorable mentions here because we go a little bit above and beyond here on the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special. Shamar Turner from Texas A&M. Quickness, explosion, 6'3", 290 pounds. A little bit undersized there, kind of along the lines of Amoro Ojomo in terms of body weight. Darius Alexander from Toledo. The Eagles know all about the Toledo program with Quinyon Mitchell. There's Alfred Collins from Texas. And this is an interesting one and a name worth bookmarking because the Eagles have shown notable interest in this player, and I view him as a second-round pick, and that's T.J. Sanders from South Carolina. Really good length. I like his physicality at the line of scrimmage and his ability to push the pocket. He doesn't have a ton of volume as a pass rusher. That's something that is a common theme throughout these players as I'm mentioning them. Just 9.5 sacks in his career, and he had 4 sacks last season. So, real quick, you heard me run through it. My favorite of the bunch that the Eagles have a realistic chance at getting would be Walter Nolan, because that's a player that when I mocked him first in the first round to the Eagles, I don't know, a month or two ago, I got a lot of comments that there's no way he's not going to be available there. This is unrealistic. Well, as you can see here, he's my 5th defensive tackle, and a lot of folks may even have him at 4. Either way, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he would be available. And I think pairing him with Jalen Carter, and then all of a sudden you have Jordan Davis and you have Moro Ojomo and maybe Thomas Booker rounding out that room, all of a sudden you have a pretty talented group. But I do want to hear from my producer, Austin Jones, who does a great job back there. Austin, which defensive tackle, maybe not even the ones that I mentioned, would you like to see on the Eagles, and do you feel is the best fit?
See, I'm right there with you with Walter Nolan. I like the fact that he is able to eat up space. Looking at some of his tape as well as some of the reviews on him, he's able to absorb double teams. Well, if he could absorb a double team and Jalen Carter doesn't have to, I think that makes Jalen Carter's job a lot easier, you know. The fact that he's able to bend and get a lot of strength from his lower base. I mean, if you're going to be a D tackle, you have to have that type of strength.
Have to.
And the fact that he was able to get 6.5 sacks. I know when you just say 6.5 sacks, it doesn't sound like a lot, but for a D tackle, that's a good amount of pressure that he's able to get. So if he's able to sack the quarterback 6.5 times, you can only imagine the amount of pressures that he can get and collapse that inner pocket, which is what the Eagles like to do.
And that was just 6.5 sacks in one season. A lot of these guys that I mentioned had like 6.5. You heard me say 8.5, 9.5. So not a lot of production there. So a lot of these players you're drafting based on production. But there's a lot of 3-technique players that would really fit what the Eagles do. So some appealing options. Obviously, Derek Harmon's a player. It all depends on what team and what scheme you're looking for. So there's some that may have Derek Harmon rated above Walter Nolan. In this case, I do. But again, it's like splitting hairs.
Now, you're down at the facility. You cover the team. could you describe the D tackle that fits the Eagles system, a player that, or characteristics that Vic Fangio seems to like within his defensive tackles?
Yeah, a quick, nimble feet. You have to be able to get upfield. It's hard to say. Look at Jalen Carter, but he's the prototype. But Milton Williams is probably best encompasses what he's looking for. You have to be able to be versatile. I think versatility is a big key for Vic's defense, and you have to be able to provide pressure and attack up the field. It's Jordan Davis is the one anomaly there, and he's the nose tackle. But he has late in the season he offered glimpses of pass rush, intriguing developmental pass rush traits. So this is a big year for Jordan Davis. But for all of those reasons, that's why I think it's all the more prevalent that the Eagles draft a defensive tackle. And our own Dylan McKinnon, who's running the YouTube for us tonight, he also said Walter Nolan. So I don't know. There's a lot of Walter Nolan buzz with the Eagles.
And you were early on him, too. And now that we're within 2 weeks of the draft, you see a lot of draft experts starting to mock him to the Eagles. So I just want to give you your credit and your kudos, my man.
I appreciate that. A lot of folks were mad at me when I had that. They didn't think it was realistic. But that's why when you're going through the draft, you can never deal in absolutes because it's a long process and different teams view different players. Not every player's scheme works for that scheme. And that's why I think you have to let the draft process play out because, maybe in January or February, that may have been something that was unfathomable, but right now, all of a sudden, it's looking pretty realistic. And really, what I try to do with my mock drafts, I don't do any fictional trades. I try to make it as realistic as possible. I try to gather as much information as I can to make sure that I'm being as accurate as I can, or at least have some rationale behind my picks. But now we're going to turn the page to tight end. Because if you listen to the comments made by Nick Sirianni at the NFL scouting, at the owners' meetings, he offered a lukewarm endorsement, spoke almost as if it's not a matter of if, but when there's the parting of the ways with Dallas Goedert. For those who think that Dallas Goedert is a replaceable entity on the offense or a luxury to have, well, that's simply not the case. It's not a luxury when your offense runs through A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. It's not a luxury when he's your best blocking option. It's almost a necessity. And the Eagles have him there, and he is a security blanket for Jalen Hurts. He runs with physicality and with determination after the catch. I think a lot of what he does, it really radiates throughout the sideline. And when you watch him have these runs with attitude and create yards after the catch, that energy that he brings is palpable. And so if Dallas Goedert's not on the roster, and you have Grant Calcaterra, you have Harrison Bryant, you have Kylan Granson, E.J. Jenkins, Cameron Latu, Nick Muse. None of those players are ready, in my opinion, to step up and be starters. So for a team that really relies heavily upon the tight end position, I think it would serve the Eagles well to draft one fairly early. And I don't know that you can wait till the third round to draft the tight end because then you're banking on an accelerated development or Grant Calcaterra being the bridge tight end until this player that they draft in, let's say, the second or third day of the draft is ready and up to speed. That's not to say that you draft a player in day one or day two and there's not an acclimation period, but I don't think the learning curve is as steep, especially if you go with one of the players that I'm going to mention. But nevertheless, we'll kick things off with my fifth-rated tight end, Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. Harold Fannin isn't even 21 years old yet, so there's the appeal that he has youth on his side, and he's moldable. And last season, get this, he posted 117 catches, 1,555 yards, and 10 touchdowns for Bowling Green last season. And let's not forget that there is a Bowling Green connection because Scott Loeffler, the Eagles quarterbacks coach, was recently brought on. So they're going to have all the intel they need on someone like Harold Fannin. But the one deterrent, well, there's a couple, but for me, it's him being 6'3", 241 pounds. So there's the lack of size. There's the lack of explosiveness. He ran a 4.71 and jumped just 34 inches at the NFL scouting combine. Now, that's not the be-all, end-all. I understand that. But if you turn the tape on, the play speed's drastically different. He can move a little bit, but the lack of size is going to be a deterrent for some teams, and he did not test as many expected him to. But I still think that he's a late third round pick, and he's my 5th rated tight end. We'll get to 4 and beyond coming up next here on the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special, right here on 97.5 The Fanatic.
Fanatic Sports Update.
Fanatic Sports Update. This update is brought to you by Bet365. Bet365, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Download the app today. Jesus Luzardo takes the mound tonight as the Phillies look to take the series from the Atlanta Braves after splitting the first 2 games. First pitch is for 7:15, and you can watch the game on NBC Sports Philadelphia. The Eagles have signed former LSU Tiger Terrence Marshall Jr. to a 1-year deal. The addition adds depth to the wide receiver room. Marshall Jr. has played for the Panthers, 49ers, and the Raiders. The 76ers are off, but they defeated the Wizards last night, 122-103, and that did not hurt their lottery chances. They'll be back tomorrow night versus the Atlanta Hawks, which will be their final home game of the season. Tip-offs for 7 p.m. You can listen to the game here on 97.5 The Fanatic. And then also, the Flyers beat the New York Rangers last night, 8-5, and will be back on Sunday to face the New York Islanders. Puck drop is for 12:30, and you can listen to the game here on 97.5 The Fanatic. This update's also brought to you by William Grant & Sons Tullamore Dew Irish Whiskey, the original triple distilled, triple blended, and triple cask matured Irish whiskey. When it's game time, it's Tula time. I'm Austin Jones on the home of the 76ers and Flyers, 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
Bill Colorula. Special with Andrew DiCecco. Sponsored by Rita's on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
97.5 The Fanatic. Andrew DiCecco here. I'll have you until 8 o'clock tonight, after which my man Ray Dunn will take you from 8 to 10. Talking a lot of, we spent the early part of the show really setting the table about draft needs and what the rooms look like for those positions of need. And I kind of identify where I thought the Eagles were lightest. And we're starting to go through 3 of my big boards. Tonight we're doing defensive tackle, safety, and tight end. And we're beginning to work through the tight end room. And I started off by saying, number 5, I have Harold Fannin from Bowling Green. You have to trust the eye test with him, because at 6'3", 240, he's not going to blow anybody away with the size. And he didn't test well at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indy. He ran just a 4.71, 34-inch vertical. But he plays a lot faster than that, and he was highly productive last year. So a lot of times, well, it's really every time, trust what your eyes will tell you, not what certain websites might tell you about how certain players grade out, or just don't take someone's word for it. Because I do think that he's going to be a good pro and probably could be drafted anywhere from the mid to late second or early third round. The next player here that I want to talk about is someone who's been picking up some steam, and I mentioned him on our digital platform here with Dylan, and you'll see that as it drops in the coming days. But that's Miami tight end Elijah Arroyo, 6'5", 254 pounds. This is a player who only has 46 career catches. Now, there was a knee injury that he was sort of working through in 2022 and 2023. But Elijah Arroyo is an exceptional athlete, and he had 35 catches for 590 yards and 7 touchdowns last year. I understand that those aren't eye-popping numbers, and they're not going to blow anybody away. But it does indicate what he's able to do when he's healthy, and he's been gaining some steam here in the process. In fact, if you listen to a clip of Todd McShay from ESPN talking about it, when he put out his mock draft, he mentioned Elijah Arroyo or Mason Taylor for the Eagles at 32, and then he settled on Kenneth Grant, which we went over, the defensive tackle from Michigan. But I think it's worth noting that he is a player that is rising up a little bit, but he is a projection, largely a projection. But I like his athleticism. I know talking to Austin Jones back there, he was really high on him, and we'll have to wait and see what he's able to do. He did labor through the 2022 and 2023 seasons. Prior to last year, that breakout, he had just 11 catches through those 3 seasons. So there's not a lot of production there. You're drafting this player solely based on production and what he can, or I should say, what he can be. It's a projection. I do like that he's smooth and fluid in his movements. He has really good spatial awareness, and he's good at creating after the catch. He only has 1 drop in his career, so sure-handed, and you like the athleticism there. He also has some nastiness to him as a blocker. Again, the biggest question mark for him is just a lack of experience. Is he ready to make that leap, and what are you getting if you draft an Elijah Arroyo? Austin, let me ask you real quick, because you liked him. That was the first player you named. Mm-hmm. What really stood out to you? What do you like about him?
Well, you mentioned it in your monologue right there, is the fact that he's already someone that is capable of blocking. We know that's one of the weaknesses that takes place from tight ends when they come into the pro game, is the fact that they need time to develop to becoming just perhaps an average blocker. The fact that he's already a willing blocker sells me. And you mentioned it there. He has soft hands, so he's able to get someone who, passes that are a little bit difficult. They can kind of stick to his hands. And the fact that he's able to run the scramble drill to a high capability too. The fact that he's able to, he was with Cam Ward, and Cam Ward can move around. So you have to be able to be, instead of running that out route, now you're just running a little sit down in space that Travis Kelce does. You have to be able to follow the quarterback, and we know Jalen Hurts likes to move around.
Yeah, and Elijah Arroyo can move a little bit. So a productive player when he was healthy. And that's a player that I actually got asked about him this morning when I was on Kincade and Salciunas, where he was projected to go. What do I think about him? And I like him, but it's kind of hard to me. It's kind of hard for me to get into the high second round territory. I think he's more of a late 2, probably a third rounder because of the limited production. But I do think he has a very bright future in the pros. We'll get him into the right system, develop him a little bit. Those athletic traits, the ability to create after the catch. Yeah, that's a player that I think is going to play a long time in the NFL. Now, number 3 on my list. This is a player that some have him rated number 1. Most have him rated number 2. I have him rated 3rd. And that's Colston Loveland from the University of Michigan. 6'6", 248 pounds. Look, I do like him. He's more of he's essentially a plus-size wide receiver. A 3-year starter at Michigan. He aligned in the slot almost 50% of the time. So you also have to wonder how he's going to project as an inline blocker, because I do think he leaves something to be desired there. But you're talking about as a pure pass catcher, there might not be a better one in the draft. He did have AC joint surgery in January, but all signs point to him being ready for training camp. But then again, he also didn't partake in any of the pre-draft testing, so there's obviously going to be some questions there. He's, like I said, he's essentially a plus-size wideout. He glides and runs routes like a wide receiver, and he does have the knack to get vertical and work the seams a little bit, which is certainly appealing. And I like the way that he uses his body for positioning. Even on slant routes, he uses his body to shield defensive backs, and he's aggressive at the catch point. He's going to be a defensive nightmare for his ability to work those seams and really align across formations. That should be an appealing characteristic as teams look to kind of see where he's going to slot. Big-time mismatch. But I do question if there's one sort of a hiccup there, his ability to play through contact at the NFL level. Because he does have sort of a finesse game. He's a willing blocker, but then again, so is Grant Calcaterra. I'm not saying that Colston Loveland is on that level as a blocker, because he does have a little bit more grit to him, but he's going to need to continue and grow as a blocker. He's going to need to continue to grow as a blocker, and I think enhance his play strength to make him more of a well-rounded tight end, because right now he's purely a pass catcher. You like the size, his ability to play an above-the-rim style, but I'm not quite there yet in terms of putting him as my number 2 tight end. But I do want to remind everybody you're listening to WPEN and WPEN HD1 Burlington, Philadelphia, a Beasley Media Group station broadcasting live from the Comcast Business Studio, powering possibilities. So, yeah, Colston Loveland, I think that I don't do hot takes. This is my opinion based on my evaluations and the way that I have things. And I will tell you this. For this next player I'm going to mention, there are some teams out there that have him as the second-rated tight end above Colston Loveland because of his ability to be a fit for any scheme out there, and he's far more polished as an overall player, and that is tight end Mason Taylor, a player that last week when I did my live mock draft here on the station for our draft special to kick things off, I had him going 32 to the Eagles. A lot of folks weren't happy about that, and they were mad at me. But in my opinion, he's behind the player who's number 1 on my list. He's the next best tight end in this class, and I think he's going to have the best career out of any tight end in this class. I mentioned Todd McShay. He nearly mocked Mason Taylor to the Eagles at 32 in his latest mock draft. Daniel Jeremiah had him at 32 in his position rankings. And, yeah, look, he's a player who can come off the board as early as Thursday night. That's some of the information that I've received. Could go within the first 45 picks, early second-round pick at worst. But to tell you a little bit about Mason Taylor, he's the son of Pro Football Hall of Famer Jason Taylor. His uncle is Zach Thomas, so there's great bloodlines there. He kind of reminds me, and I know a lot of folks like player comps, he reminds me of Zach Ertz for his ability to find the soft spots in zone, work the seams, the soft, natural hands. He's a fluid mover. 3-year starter for the Tigers, and I'm really big on, when I do my evaluation, experience. And when you're getting a player like that, it's not going to be a culture shock. He played in high-leverage moments. He played for a big-time program. He also holds the LSU records for catches and receiving yards at that position, and he's still just 20 years old. He doesn't turn 21 until May, and he has yet to scratch the surface of his capabilities. I really do believe that big things are going to be in the cards for Mason Taylor, and he's a crisp route runner, really crisp. And I mentioned the strong hands, but I think he's going to be a fit for every team due to the well-roundedness. And if you want some additional numbers, and I read them last week, but I'll read them now. Snaps per game. This is where Mason Taylor stacks up to some of his fellow tight ends. He sits atop that group with 71.8 snaps per game, ahead of Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. Pass block snaps per game. Mason Taylor's one there too, 7.75, ahead of Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. Run block grade, this is a big one. Mason Taylor's one there as well, 57.7% for 2024, ahead of Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. Drop passes, Mason Taylor sits atop that list too, just one last season. Career drop passes, he has just 7, which comes out to a 5.1%. And in terms of number of career games started, he's number 1 there too, 37. Tyler Warren started 31 games and Loveland 24 games. I heard folks tell me that Mason Taylor is a 3rd-round pick. They meant that. I don't know where they got their information, but they said it. Everything that I've received throughout this whole process suggests that NFL circles view him a little bit more highly than Mock Draft Mania. But I'm going to reveal my number 1 tight end, which I'm sure you all can figure that out right now who follow the draft. And I'm going to mention some other players, if they don't, outside the top 5, who really caught my eye for one reason or another. Right here, you're listening to the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special on 97.5 The Fanatic.
For answers and comments on the Super Bowl champs, here again is your host, Birds Insider Andrew DiCecco, sponsored by Weekdays on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
.97.5 The Fanatic, Birds Insider Draft Special. Andrew DiCecco here. I have you until 8 o'clock. And Ray Dunn has you until 10 from there. So make sure you stick around for that. Starting to break down some of my big boards at critical positions for the Eagles right now. And we went through defensive tackle to start things off. And we've been working my way through the tight end position. And to kind of recap there, at number 5, Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. At 4, Elijah Arroyo from Miami. Then at 3, Colston Loveland from Michigan. Number 2, Mason Taylor from LSU, who I still believe that LSU didn't even use him to the best of his ability. So I think he does have some untapped potential to add to that. But number 1, let's end the suspense, Tyler Warren, Penn State, 6'6", 6'5", however you measure it up, 255 pounds. This is a versatile Swiss Army knife and a clean prospect. You'd be hard-pressed to find an area of his game that isn't polished. Now, you're not getting Brock Bowers, who, of course, is with the Raiders. He's not that caliber of a tight end, but he is the head of the class. However, I will also tell you that there are some who have Colston Loveland above Tyler Warren. He's not the slam dunk number 1, but it's generally the consensus. But he's a versatile Swiss Army knife. I think he can be moved around formations like he was at Penn State, where he played inline, he played in the backfield, he played in the slot, he even played out wide. Nimble feet with good vision on the move, and he seeks out contact. You can kind of, whether it's a shovel pass or whether it's just a dump off, I think that he's able to manufacture yards after the catch. And he kind of reminds me of a wrecking ball once he gets moving. He's that kind of athlete. But what I will also say is that he's a little stiff as a pure route runner, and I do question whether or not he can regularly separate from defenders at the pro level. He's also a developing blocker. He does have the size for it. He is willing, but a little bit, I think he's a little bit of a work in progress there. And the question that I have, and again, this is not a hot take, this is a legitimate question, is he a manufactured touch player? And how will that play out for every team? I don't know that he'll be a fit for every team. I think he's going to have a very, very good career. Probably, you could look at him or Loveland for the second best career, but I think that Mason Taylor is going to have the longest and probably the best career, because I do think that there are other levels of his game that he hasn't yet tapped into. And there are other players at the position that I wanted to get into before I go to Austin Jones, my producer, and hear what he likes. But Gunnar Helm from Texas is a player that I've gotten asked about quite a bit. 6'5", 240 pounds. He's not flashy or explosive. He ran just a 4.8 at the combine, 4.84 to be exact. But he's a highly intelligent player, strong hands, and I like his ability to churn out yards after the catch. He's another one, a work in progress as a blocker, probably going to be destined for the 3rd round. Who knows? If the Eagles wait to take a tight end, he could be there at 96. Terrence Ferguson from Oregon, I had mocked him to the Eagles for my first 2 mock drafts at pick 96. I like his size. He reminds me a little bit of Dallas Goedert at 6'5", 255 pounds. But the production was minimal. He's never managed more than 43 receptions or 591 yards in a season. But kind of like Mason Taylor, I still feel like Ferguson was underutilized in the Ducks offense. The last one I'm going to mention is a player that I really like, and I highly encourage everyone to go out there and kind of dig into his tape, because I think you might become infatuated with it. Oronde Gadsden II out of Syracuse, 6'5", 240 pounds. He ran a 4.65 40 at Syracuse's pro day, an 82-inch wingspan, well, nearly an 82-inch wingspan, and a very productive final season there, 73 catches, 934 yards, and 7 touchdowns. What I like about him is that he moves well, he likes the body control, and he attacks the football. Also, when he does catch the football, it's the fluid change of direction that really stands out. I think he's much more of a pass catcher than he is a blocker right now. But if you're looking for value in the fourth round, if you're the Eagles, and let's say you stumble on tremendous value on day one and day two, and you're not able to address the tight end position because the board fell away, in which was sort of unforeseen, you can get someone like an Oronde Gadsden in the fourth round. And I think he's going to have a very long and prosperous career at the NFL level. Now, Austin, I want to get your take here. I know that I kind of alluded to you liking this player, but aside from Elijah Arroyo, maybe, is there another player that maybe I've mentioned or you've come across in watching college football that really intrigues you?
It would be Harold Fenton. Just the fact that he has the, let's say, relationship with the new quarterbacks coach. I think he's going to be able to be on the Eagles draft board. I mean, you went through the stats: 117 catches, over 1,500 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I know it's for Bowling Green, but I'm sorry, there's some statistics that outlie the conference that you play in. We kind of seen it with Quinyon Mitchell. Just because you're in a smaller conference doesn't mean you can't impact Sunday football. You know, he's crafty in space. He's able to fight through contact, which you're going to need through the tight end. And I've seen a couple stiff arms from him as well this past season. So I know we got that great one from Dallas Goedert. So let's get another tight end, let's say, that can stiff arm some defensive backs.
I like that. The Harold Fenton Jr. pick from Bowling Green. And that's another one that Don't let the testing numbers,
yards.
Don't let the testing numbers sway your opinion one way or the other, because this is a highly productive player. I don't care that it was at Bowling Green. You could question the level of competition, but for me, when I evaluate, I purely go off of the eye test. You couple that with talking to different folks and trying to gather as much information as possible before you come to an opinion. I don't look at anyone else's big board. I don't look at mock drafts. I evaluate players, and I don't go with the consensus. I go with what my opinion is. And sometimes that's a little bit, it strays from the norm. But I feel pretty strongly that he's going to be a good pro, and he's my fifth tight end, and I believe that he's going to have a really long career. And if he lands in the right place, he can be an early impact player next season as a rookie. But I think as we sort of went through that tight end position, by the way, Dylan McKinnon, he went with Mason Taylor as well. And I'm just going to assume that Ray Dunn went with Mason Taylor too, because I assume he's been listening to my shows or reading my work, as he typically does. But I think as we sort of move through the position, and you see that there's not a lot behind Dallas Goedert, we have to wait and see what happens with Dallas Goedert. But I think this needs to be the year that the Eagles take a tight end. And at worst, he learns from Dallas Goedert for a year. But I think the likeliest course of action is Dallas Goedert moves on, and the Eagles now have to identify who they want to be his successor and really complement the room. They're going to fill out the depth chart with what I believe will be Grant Calcaterra, one of Harrison Bryant, and Kylan Granson. And look, I'm pretty bullish on E.J. Jenkins as a third or a fourth tight end, and he can play some special teams. So I think that might be the makeup of that room. 610-632-0975 if you want to get involved or ask me anything draft-related, Eagles-related. I got you till 8 o'clock. This is the Birds NFL Draft Show on 97.5 The Fanatic.
Fanatic Sports Update.
I'm Austin Jones, and this is your Fanatic Sports Update. The Eagles have signed former LSU Tiger Terrace Marshall Jr. to a one-year deal. The addition adds depth to the wide receiver room. Marshall Jr. has played for the Panthers, 49ers, and the Raiders in his career. The 76ers are off, but they defeated the Wizards last night, 122-103, and that win did not hurt their lottery chances. They'll be back tomorrow night versus the Atlanta Hawks. Tip-off is for 7 p.m., and you can listen to the game on 97.5 The Fanatic. The Flyers beat the New York Rangers last night 8-5, and we'll be back on Saturday to face the New York Islanders. Puck drop is for 12:30, and you can listen to the game on 97.5 The Fanatic. I'm Austin Jones on the home of the 76ers and Flyers, 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
Draft Special with Andrew DiCecco, sponsored by Reedus on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
.5 The Fanatic. This is the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special. Andrew DiCecco here. I have you until 8 o'clock. We've been going through my big board. I have yet to reveal that until this very show. Went through defensive tackle, went through tight end, and now one of my favorite positions to evaluate, well, that's safety. We'll start at 5, as we've been doing, counting down. Billy Bowman Jr. from Oklahoma, 5'10", 192 pounds. So I understand that he doesn't have the prototypical size for that position, but he's a 4-year starter. He's a lineman versatile. He played everywhere on that defense. And I'm a really big fan of his instincts and his ability to make plays on the football. 11 career interceptions, 4 defensive touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. He covers a ton of ground. And I think that he can fulfill that playmaking quota that the Eagles lost when they shipped C.J. Gardner-Johnson to Houston. He also has special teams upside, and his football intelligence jumps out when you watch the tape. He's not being talked about enough. He's starting to get talked about a little bit more, but he slots in at number 5 for me and pushed somebody outside of my top 5 that I'll share with you all after I kind of work through this list. Number 4 for me is Andrew Makuba from Texas. This is another player who's not going to wow you with his frame at 5'11", 186. But when you watch the tape, if you watch any of the Texas games this year, you'll see a highly intelligent player. He's good at manipulating quarterbacks, manipulating the eyes of quarterbacks and kind of giving them a look where they're thinking something else is, that they're seeing something else. He has 5 interceptions last season for the Longhorns. He was a free safety in their defense, but he throws his body around despite not having that frame, and you have to worry about long-term durability, which I think is going to be a deterrent for some teams. I personally think he's a second-round talent. There are some out there that view him as a third-round player because of the lack of size. But this is a very productive player, and he spent the early part of his career at Clemson before transferring to Texas, and he had a really big season. Again, not the biggest guy in the world at 5'11", 186, but one of my absolute favorite players, defensive players in this class. And again, I can't emphasize enough of how smart he is in diagnosing plays and baiting quarterbacks. Number 3 for me is Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. 6 foot, 205. He can play 2 high, 1 high, box. He can play even nickel. I've just been a huge advocate for his game. If the Eagles were to get him, I sort of forecast him going top of the second round, so 64. They may have to trade up ever so slightly to get him. But from a player who had no interceptions the first 2 seasons, he combined his final 2 years, 13 interceptions. Great ball skills. I like his experience and his durability. He was available for Notre Dame and a big-time playmaker. He might not have the same wiggle as some of these other players, but you talk about production, durability, and ball skills. I think that projects to be a highly effective starter at the NFL level, and I view him as a day 1 starter based on his football intelligence. And let's not lose sight of the fact that safeties and linebackers have arguably the most daunting responsibilities in a Vic Fangio defense. So you want a safety that's smart, that can diagnose things, like a Reed Blankenship. His football IQ is off the charts, but Xavier Watts is a player that I would really like to see what he's able to do in a Vic Fangio defense. Looking at number 2, and this player is a workout warrior, and he's the top-rated safety for some. I have him slotted to go in the first round. That's Nick Emenwari from South Carolina. 6'3", 220 pounds, so he kind of reminds me a little bit of Cam Chancellor in his build. He's really a box safety, so I'm not so sure that he would fit in Philadelphia. it would be kind of redundant. You already have Sidney Brown, you have Reed Blankenship, who has a little bit more range, but he's best suited playing closer to the line of scrimmage. He's a 3-year starter, and his measurables are off the charts. Remember, I said he's 6'3", 220 pounds. He ran a 4.38 40 at the NFL Combine. He leaped a 43-inch vertical, and he had an 11.6 broad jump. I mean, that's just tremendous. And that certainly, if he was ever on the cusp, on the fence about being in the first-round conversation, well, he cemented his status as being a first-round safety. And I would understand if there's a lot of folks out there that are really bullish on his upside. I just don't see a world in which the Eagles are able to get him. And I also don't think that he would be necessarily a fit. I mentioned that he's more of a box safety, but he does have exceptional range. And I like his sideline-to-sideline range on short to intermediate routes. He plays with anticipation, and he closes with ferocity. When he hits you, you could tell that ball carriers feel it. As a player, he's maybe not as fluid as some of the other players that I mentioned, like the first player on this list that I'm going to get to in a moment. But he is a physical tone setter, and one of those guys that, how I would best describe him, he's a dark alley kind of a guy. He's a guy that you want with you if you're walking down a dark alley, because he kind of goes about, he has an aura about him, and he plays the game with an edge. That's Nick Emenwari from South Carolina. And again, I have him slotted to go in the first round, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, as far as where in the first round he goes, because he could go in the first half or he could go later, and that depends on where the Eagles are and if they really deem him as a player that's trade-up worthy, and I just don't see it based on skill set alone. However, the next player on this list I think would be trade-up worthy. However, given the positional value and the emphasis the team places on the position, I have a hard time envisioning the Eagles trading up for this player, and that's Malachi Starks from the University of Georgia. Sure, there's a possibility of him going to anywhere from 25 to the back end of the first round, but you have to look at he checks off a lot of boxes. 6'1", 197 pounds. So you like the length there. He was a 3-year starter for the Bulldogs. He's scheme versatile, so he can play the post, he can play the slot, he can play box safety. He's super athletic, and he has the long speed that you need. What I really like about him, and I'm really big on this as I evaluate safeties, you can see the communication. You can see him not shying away from being vocal when he's on the field, getting guys lined up and really taking on that leadership type of role. And I think that stems from the whole Georgia program. They sort of mold you for that. He's fluid. He plays with a lot of range. I like his ball skills, and I talk about the communication prowess, which is really they lost a lot of that when C.J. Gardner-Johnson went over to Houston in that trade. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, we all know that he was vocal, but he also did a lot behind the scenes to assure that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean were assignment sound, being that vocal presence on the back end. But if you want to watch some good Malachi Starks film, I encourage you to go back to anything from the 2023 season where he had 10 passes defended and 3 interceptions. But you're talking about a ready-made back-end defender and somebody who I believe would succinctly fill that void left with C.J. Gardner-Johnson leaving. Again, it's hard to envision the Eagles trading up for him, but that is my top-rated safety, and I think that he would be an immediate upgrade for any defense. I don't think that it has to do with scheme. For him, he can fit any defense out there, and that's kind of where I'm at with Malachi Starks and the safety room. Now, I will say that Billy Bowman from Oklahoma, he sort of moved up my rankings throughout the process. He edged out Kevin Winston from Penn State, who's coming off a knee injury. He's a smart player. He's a finisher. He's really effective in run support, and I like that he offers special teams versatility, though if he's going to be drafted in the second or third round, which is exactly where he's pegged to go, I mean, I think teams are going to have a little bit more optimism that he can be something more than that early on. But I also, if you're looking for a deep cut, I like Dante Trader from the University of Maryland. He's more of a nickel safety hybrid type of player. He was a Senior Bowl participant. He worked through a lot of adversity throughout the pre-draft process. And when I look at everything that he was able to everything he was able to kind of work through and still test fairly well, perform fairly well. He's a little bit undersized, about 5'10", 5'11", 196. He kind of reminds me of if you understand where I'm going with this, a Baltimore Ravens type of defensive back. And I'll give you one more day 3 player that I like that's kind of off the beaten path, and that is Cal safety Craig Woodson, 6 foot, 200 pounds. The one deterrent for him is that he's 24 years old right now, and I don't view him as a starter. I view him as a prominent depth piece and who can help you on special teams. But those are some other players that I really like at that position. Austin, anyone that I either mentioned or that you've watched throughout the season that really jumps out to you that you like?
Yeah, you did an honorable mention with Kevin Winston Jr. from Penn State. I know he's coming off a torn ACL, but torn ACLs aren't what they used to be 20-something years ago. Guys can bounce back rather quickly now. The fact that he has long arms and does not miss tackles, he has an enforcer mentality. I think that fits well, not only for this defensive Vic Fangio's type of defensive back, but also this type of city. There's certain players that you just know would get this city, and the fact that he has an enforcer mentality and the fact that he wants to, quote, bring the boom, I think that is something that can fit into this Eagles defense.
Yeah, he certainly does want to bring the boom. And just 2 more honorable mentions very quickly. Lathan Ransom, one of my favorite names in the draft from Ohio State, 6 foot, 203 pounds. He was a 3-year starter, versatile and rangy player. And this is an Alabama player, so he would make some sense. He's going to be available likely on day 2 or 3, probably day 3, like a 4th-round pick. 4-year starter at Alabama, physical, but he plays with a volatile edge. So you like the aggression that he plays with, but he kind of reminds me of Sidney Brown in his demeanor, and you worry about sometimes that aggression working against him. But if he's able to kind of harness that and he lands with a team that's going to kind of maybe coach that out of him, you might have something there. I love the fact that he's from a winning program, and that is sort of one of the things that I jot down as I go through my evaluation. He's 5'11", 197 pounds. A lot to like there in that safety room. Again, one of my favorite positions to evaluate, and the Eagles should have no shortage of options to give that room a boost. But coming up next, we're going to play for you Devin Jackson of the Philadelphia Inquirer. He does a tremendous job covering the NFL draft. He joined the Best Show Ever earlier this week and had some really interesting things to say about the draft. All that and more coming up next. You're listening to the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special right here on 97.5 The Fanatic.
The Philadelphia 76. Insider perspective on the NFL Draft is right here. Now, more of the Birds Insider Draft Special with Andrew DiCecco, sponsored by Rita's on 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.
Where did you come from, baby? And ooh, won't you take me there right away? Won't you, baby?
All my bounce back music's good, don't lie. 97.5 The Fanatic. Andrew DiCecco here till 8 o'clock here. Ray Dunn's got you from 8 to 10. We're having some fun here on a Thursday night. This is the Birds Insider NFL Draft Special. But before we get to the interview of Devin Jackson of the Philadelphia Inquirer, introducing Rita's new Skittles Ice. Try it again in a gelati or ice blender and add Rita's new Skittles Pop topping for extra fun. Trust me on this. I would not lead you astray. That's the real deal. I had some Rita's yesterday. And when they dropped Rita's off here, when I was doing the best show ever with Tyrone, Silvana, and Austin, and whoever else was working, yeah, we housed Dylan. We housed a whole carton of that thing. It's legit, and I highly encourage everybody to go check that out. But without further ado, we're going to now play for you Devin Jackson, the Philadelphia Inquirer, who joined the best show ever earlier this week.
Joining us right now for the first time on this particular show. He does a tremendous job covering the draft for the Inquirer and experience the new look of Inquirer Sports where fans can read, watch, and listen to their favorite reporters and columnists. Go to Inquirer.com/sports on the Comcast Business Hotline. Devin Jackson, how you doing today, Devin?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. And I always love this time of year. The NFL Draft is the best time of year. And then, we're a few weeks away. So looking forward to discussing it and talking about some of these draft prospects.
Yes, indeed. So first things first, I want to look at the Eagles and the makeup of their roster right now. Now, we know after the draft, with Howie being very conscious of compensation picks, they'll make some trades and they'll make some signings. But right now, going into the draft, which position do you think they need to most address before we get to any specific players?
I would say I would probably look at safety as probably one of those positions that needs to be addressed, just because, you lose C.J. Gardner-Johnson or you decide to trade him. And you have Reed Blankenship. He's been a great veteran presence, has had some consistent play as a former undrafted free agent, but playing opposite of him is a little bit of a question mark. I know, a lot of people are optimistic about what Sidney Brown can bring. But obviously, coming back from his injury last year or towards the end of his rookie year and coming back in the middle of last year, just hasn't quite found his footing yet. But I think, when you look at the secondary specifically, and the reason that they were able to win the Super Bowl is the secondary was a big reason, and them going out and getting Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean in the draft. Isaiah Rodgers was added as kind of a veteran presence as well in that room. But you look at the safety position, it's just Reed Blankenship, a guy that's taken most of the snaps and started most of the games in that room. So I think safety will probably be my choice and the biggest area of need to address.
Sitting where they are, sitting at 32, what are the chances that Howie trades out of there?
I would say there is certainly a good chance, just because I feel like the strength of this draft is really in that 35 to 75 range of the draft, like where you get a lot of good players that are probably ranked pretty similarly. So obviously you don't want to get completely out of that kind of that mix, but after the first probably 10, 12 picks, a lot of teams. It's kind of a wild card on who exactly is going to go in the first round and first round caliber players. So I think, trading out at 32 would be a smart move, of course, to acquire more picks in this particular draft, but more particularly day 2 and some early day 3 picks. But I think, it would make a lot of sense to trade out at 32, especially if the player they want isn't there.
Also, I want to ask you about this. You have a breakdown, and people should go to Inquirer and read it. You've been doing these prospect trackers, and you talk about a lot of different players. And Mel Kiper also came out with a mock draft today that talks about, has the Eagles picking one of the guys you profile, and that's Josh Connerly Jr., the tackle from Oregon. If he was there, I have a couple questions. One, do you think he would be a decent fit, and do you think in the short term he could play guard before shifting over to tackle to maybe replace Lane Johnson long term?
Yeah, when I think of an Eagles pick, and especially if they pick an offensive lineman, they're looking guys that can play right now. So I think Connerly, first of all, I think he can play both guard and tackle. Obviously, you want him at tackle and use some of the athleticism. He's a former running back. He played running back in high school before going over to the offensive line as a junior in high school. So he's still really relatively new to the position. You know, he's only played about 4 or 5 years so far, including his time at Oregon. But I think he's a fit at 32. You know, I will be pleased with the pick because I think he has a lot of upside, a lot of athleticism, a lot of potential. He went down at the Senior Bowl, had a really good week there. You know, he had some really good testing numbers at the NFL Combine. He kind of matches all the thresholds you kind of look for in a future NFL tackle. And he has a chance to potentially learn, you know, under Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, and he can compete to play at right guard. You know, I think, you know, when you're looking for a player that, you know, can move in space, that can block his job moving bodies in a running game, I think Connerly fits all those things that the Eagles would like an offensive lineman, and I think he's a potential fit for sure for what Philly likes to do, especially in the running game, and then his athleticism and ability to pass protect as a pass blocker.
Where do you feel like the Eagles will get their edge rusher?
I really think on day 2 is probably where they're going to get their edge rusher. You know, I've kind of gone back and forth with it because there's going to be probably 1 or 2 guys that people expect to go a little bit earlier that don't. But I think when you look at the edge rusher class, I think there's a lot of guys you can get on day 2 that can make an impact immediately as well. I think this class in particular is about 10 to 12 names strong. You don't have to take a guy in the first round, especially, you know, if the guy that you really want is off the board at 32. And I think you just get more bang for your buck from an edge rusher's perspective. A guy you get on day 2, you know, I look at JT Tuimalu from Ohio State as a potential guy, Devin Jackson from Arkansas. I think those are 2 guys that are going to be around in the second round, and I think it could be addressed. And maybe if the Eagles push to the third round, you know, they got Jalix Hunt in the third round last year, and you saw what he was able to do in the Super Bowl. So I certainly think taking the edge rusher on day 2 would make a lot of sense, especially if you don't go there for round 1.
We're speaking with Devin Jackson, does a tremendous job really doing great draft breakdowns for the Inquirer. I want to ask you about the tight end position because historically the Eagles have had really good ones in the recent memory. You know, going from barely from Chad Lewis forward, they've always had a good one. It appears that Goddard's on the way out. If they were to address it in the draft, what spot do you think makes sense? Because you already mentioned safety. We mentioned offensive tackle. We mentioned edge rusher. Where do you think it would make sense to address tight end, assuming Goddard's gone, which appears to be the case?
I think it would be probably the perfect spot, in my opinion. The sweet spot would be trading back out of the first round and maybe that early second round area.
Gotcha.
You know, in the late 30s, early 40s. I think that would make the most sense to take one if you're going to take one early. Mason Taylor from LSU, to me, makes the most sense in that particular range. But if you're not going to address it in the first 64 picks, I think you probably wait till the third round and maybe wait to one of your fourth round picks to make that decision. But I think there's a clear drop off after the first 3 or 4 tight ends. You know, to me, obviously Tyler Warren from Penn State, Colston Loveland from Michigan are both guys that are probably going to go in the first round. But then afterwards, I think Elijah Arroyo from Miami, LSU's Mason Taylor are 2 guys that I think are going to go in that early second round area. And then after that, you can get kind of a guy that maybe he's not going to start this year, especially if you don't take one after round 2. If you take one in round 3 or round 4, you look at more of a developmental type of player, someone that can give you some receptions as a rookie, but probably won't take on the dominant role. So I'm looking at guys like Oregon's Terrence Ferguson as a potential guy, Gunnar Helm from Texas, who I know the Eagles met with at the Combine. So I think that's kind of the way that I see it is a trade back from 32 to me probably signals they probably were going in a direction of tight end early on. But they decide to wait a little bit on tight end. I think they're looking for more of a guy that they can kind of grow and develop in their tight end room.
That was Devin Jackson from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Does a tremendous job covering the NFL draft, and he joined Tyrone, Ricky, and Silvana earlier in the week to provide some insight. I was just looking at X, and my guy Emery Hunt, he also does a phenomenal job covering the draft. He said every draft cycle, end of the previous year, next year's class is generational. Summer, 45 top 10 locks. In the fall, no way, insert player, falls out of round 1. I received a lot of that. Post All-Star game, 65 first-round risers. Early APR. Draft ain't deep, only 3 first-round grades. And by mid-April, 34 teams looking to trade out of the first. That sounds about right for the pre-draft cycle. That's kind of,
oh my Lord.
That pretty much sums it up. That's really what you hear. And then we're quickly approaching Smokescreen Week, which is the week leading up to the draft, where every team's interested in this player. Everyone's looking to move up, trade out of this pick and that. You always have to be able to kind of sift through that and figure out what makes the most sense. But some of the interesting things that Devin said, he mentioned safety as a position of need. Of course it was. Of course it is. And he mentioned a lot of the players that we talked about. But if you think about it, the more I think about it, the Eagles really can't wait to get it. They can't wait past day 2 to get a safety and address that. Because regardless of what you think about Sidney Brown, regardless of what the Eagles think about him, they need depth there. And I happen to like Tristan McCollum. I know that I seem to be in the minority of that based on the latter part of the season when he had to step in there, but I think he's a good football player. I think he's probably a good fourth safety to play on special teams, but they still need to add a player there that can be either a third safety or a starter opposite Reed Blankenship, and I don't think they can wait past day 2 to get that player. He mentioned edge rusher on day 2. I don't know that they can do that. I think that they're going to have to go a little bit earlier than that to get an edge rusher, possibly in the first round. Donovan Ezeraku is a player that I mentioned. If they do go edge rusher on day 2, that's another player that I think could help them, and they wouldn't have to be pressured to play right away. And I think that that's an appealing player to get, knowing that there's not a lot of pressure. You could step in and be a rotational piece. I personally think that if they have the opportunity to strike on day 1 and get a player like an Ezeraku or even maybe a James Pierce, they should definitely do that and add the best player possible, because I have to imagine that they would classify as the best player available. He also mentioned tight end, which we ran through. He said possibly there's a big drop-off after the top 3 players, but his top 3 players are a little bit different than mine. I have Tyler Warren. I have Mason Taylor leading the way, and then Colston Loveland from Michigan. But I don't know if they can wait to the 3rd or 4th round, because as we were kind of going through that, they have to develop, for one. And I don't know if they have a player on the roster right now, aside from Dallas Goedert, obviously, that could step in and be a bridge player. So because of that, I think they're almost backed into a corner, and they have to draft a tight end early and really develop them for the future, whether that's for a year working under Dallas Goedert or whether they're having to kind of be thrown into the fire a little bit and be that starter. But it's going to be interesting to see how things fall. And next week, when we reconvene, we're going to go through linebacker big board. We're going to go through edge rusher and anything else that kind of pops out along the way. It's been a lot of fun. Austin Jones, great job producing. I always appreciate you, my man. Dylan McKinnon running the YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe, because we have a lot of great things on our YouTube right now. The 97.5 The Fanatic official YouTube page. Rachel Pitts, great job. Mike Vito and Scott Mastower, thanks a lot. And I'll look forward to talking to everybody next week. This has been the Birds Insider Draft Special. Have a great night.
Wawa. With Wawa's $2, $4, $6 menu, craft the order you want with the options at $2, $4, and $6. Limited time only. Gotta have a Wawa. The Eagles have signed former LSU Tiger Terrace Marshall Jr. to a 1-year deal. The addition adds depth to the wide receiver room. Marshall Jr. has played for the Panthers, 49ers, and the Raiders so far in his career. The 76ers are off tonight, but they did defeat the Wizards last night, 122-103. And this win did not hurt their lottery chances. They'll be back tomorrow night versus the Atlanta Hawks. Tip-off is for 7 p.m., and you can listen to the game here on 97.5 The Fanatic. The Flyers beat the New York Rangers last night 8-5, and we'll be back Saturday to face the New York Islanders. Puck drop is for 12:30, and you can listen to the game here on 97.5 The Fanatic. Saturday's a busy slate. The Union return to action as well. They'll face New York City. The game is set for 7:30, and you can listen to the game where? On 97.5 The Fanatic. I'm Austin Jones on the home of the 76ers and Flyers, 97.5 The Fanatic and 97.5thefanatic.com.